Hi.
Welcome to the show. Welcome to the Dr. Paul show. I really appreciate you, Douglas, coming along and coming on the show with me and your lovely wife. Tell me, Douglas, tell me your story. I know I first saw you, I think 3 or 4 years ago. You were referred to me by Ron, who works with patients who have had PTSD, and I know you were in the Korean War.
Yeah.
Um, so go back and tell me about that time.
You mean in Korea
Yeah.
or at the time I met Ron?
Well, no. I know Ron referred you to me, but yeah, go back to your time at Korea because I know you were with the army in the early to mid 1950s, right?
Yes, I was in the Korean theater.
What year were you in? What year were you in Korea?
I was there in 1950 through 1953
Okay.
during
So
the entire time.
yeah, so tell us about. I know it's difficult sometimes to talk about these things. I know it was a difficult time over there, but tell us what your experiences were there. Some of the things that you that really were traumatizing to you.
Uh, well, I think that combat in the front lines is traumatizing to most anybody.
Right.
But what struck me particular were a couple of incidents that I went through that kind of stuck in my mind. One of them was when I was in a dugout and we were on the front lines and the enemy was had us virtually surrounded. And so in this bunker that we were huddled down in, there were four or five of us. And one of the one of the non-coms in charge was severely injured, and we were surrounded. We couldn't get him out, so we were waiting for daylight to be able to get him out because uh, if we came out in the dark, the Chinese were every place. So what we did, we sat there for most of the night, and um, he was getting worse. This non-com who was injured, he was getting worse. It didn't look like he was going to make it, so we had to make a decision whether to go out and make a run for it or to wait for daylight so the troops would be able to uh, come and get us out of our hard spot. But eventually, I had to make that decision myself because the guy who was injured was the ranking non-com, and I was next in line. So I had to decide whether we would get out and make a run for it and take the chance of all of us getting killed or wait until morning and so our troops could come and rescue us. So I made the decision to wait till morning because I sat there and I thought to myself, okay, we've got five guys in here. One is dying. The other four are still alive. I'm going to have to sacrifice this guy in order to save the other four. So I decided we would wait till morning. And by morning, he was dead. And that was not a very pleasant experience. That weighed for me, still weighs on me because I was responsible for his death and he was one of our own. That was one of my most uh, telling experiences that I've lived with for all these years. The other one was when I went back behind the lines to pick up a new radio operator because the one we had he got killed, and I went behind the lines, took charge of him, and started back up toward the front lines, and it was muddy because it's raining like hell, and he slipped and fell and rolled down the hill into a barbed wire fence that the infantry had put up. So I decided uh, instead of taking him on up to the front lines because he was torn up by barbed wire, I better just take him back to the first aid station. So I took him back to the first aid station and I went back toward the front lines to wait for him. And while he was in the first aid station, an 88 millimeter Russian rocket came over and wiped this first aid station out and wiped him out too. So I'm thinking to myself, had I taken him on up to the front lines, he would still be here today. So that's a burden I carry with me, and those are two of the experiences I had with my time in the 2 years I spent in combat.
You said when you took them back to the first aid station, didn't the station get rocketed or bombed, or was that the case, or did he die when he was at the first aid station?
Yeah, because when I took him back down the first aid station to get him patched up, I went back halfway to the front lines in case I was needed there. And while I was sitting there waiting for him, I'm watching down where he's being treated. And as I said, an 88 millimeter mortar round came in and wiped out the first aid station and wiped him out too. So had I taken him on up to the front lines, he would still be here today, even though he would have been torn up a bit. So that's guilt that's on my mind as well. I feel that I'm responsible for the death of two of our own men.
Well, in the first one, hadn't you told me that you were in the bunker, but hadn't you been buried, or you had been bombed, or hadn't you been you're been buried underneath some rubble, or in hiding under there, or what?
Yeah. So the bunker was just half a bunker because it had been torn up pretty well by uh, artillery fire anyway, but at least we were taking cover in there. I feel that I'm responsible for the loss of two of our own men.
Well, I don't. I mean, again, I know you feel that way. I don't see it that way. I think you made the decision you had to make at the time. I think the you know you would you had to risk potentially other lives, and so you were thinking in the right direction. And I think there's no way that you could have known that he was going to die that night, and it's possible that had you had moved earlier, then all of you would have died. And for the second one, you took him to the first aid station, and that's the right thing to do with someone who's that injured and bleeding. And you don't want to take an injured, bleeding guy to the front lines and to fight because he's already torn up. And so and you didn't know that there was going to be a mortar that launched into that first aid area. So neither of these things you were responsible for, because you made the right rational decision at the time. I know that doesn't necessarily help because you're still going to blame yourself, but from my
well, you're pleading my case, but I have found myself guilty, so that's the way it is.
I know you do. And I hear that a lot from veterans too, not just you. I've heard that many, many times about decision making at the time and living with decisions. But that's sometimes what happens when you're in charge. That you have to make tough decisions at the time. And you were also, weren't you I think you were a radio operator where you would tell like coordinates where the enemy was.
I was close. Yeah, I was close air support for the infantry.
Right.
I'd say I went out on the front lines and called in airstrikes on the enemy positions directly in front of us. That was my job.
Right. Any other?
So a lot of time.
What's that?
Pardon?
I said, are there any other instances that come to mind? I know those were the major two ones, but I'm sure there were other instances that you went through over there. I know that probably too many to count.
Yeah, but I don't talk about them. I just eat them.
Right. So when you first saw me, tell me about like what was going on with your mood and at the time, and what you were going through, and maybe your wife can chime in too. What were you going through at the time when I first saw you?
Well, I first of all, because I spent so many hours in the trenches in the front lines, because we were short of men, because in that war they caught us with our pants down, so we were short on men. So I spent a lot of time up on the front lines. We didn't have anybody to relieve us, so there's a lot of instances, but those two are two that have stuck with me the most. And I could go on all afternoon if you wanted me to, but my job was to go out in front of the front lines and call in airstrikes on the enemy artillery positions that were pounding our troops. And so it was a job that you pretty much did by yourself. You crawled out there in no man's land so you could get a view of the enemy artillery, and then you tried to call in airstrikes from the airplanes to knock out those positions that were pounding our men. So I try not to think about all that. I don't run all that stuff through my mind, but those two instances I mentioned to you, particularly tough for me, because those were decisions I made to have our own men die. And I have never gotten over that. It's no better today than it was those days. I've learned to deal with it a little better because now I'm 95, and time eventually erodes some of it, but it never all goes away.
Right.
So Dr. Corona asked you, when you first went to see him, what were some of the reasons that brought you to him, and what were you experiencing at that time?
Well, I ran into, what did you say this man's name was?
Yeah, Ron.
Yeah. We happened to see this thing in the public library about what Ron was putting on, so I thought I'd go and see what the hell it was all about, because he mentioned Korea. And so we went to listen to his presentation, and that's when I decided that, hey, there is somebody out there that I can talk to about this. So I went and talked to him, and then he picked up the ball and ran with it from there.
And what were some of the things that you were experiencing here at home?
Oh,
That's
well, the worst thing is at nighttime when you're either laying there in bed awake, or you try to go to sleep, and then you get these flashbacks where you go through the combat again, or you
nightmares.
You get nightmares where it's associated type of nightmares that seem to have to do with conflict and
Right.
Various
fear,
anger, resentment. That I had to go and other guys didn't have to go because they found some way to get out of it. So there's a lot of stuff goes on in your mind when you're in that position.
So when we went to see Dr. Corona, the nightmares and the flashbacks, but at that time we saw him, the nightmares were becoming more problematic for you.
Yeah, because as I got older, I dwelt more on it.
Right.
Instead of getting better, it was getting worse when I went to see Dr. Corona.
I think you too.
So, and there were times. Go ahead.
Were you having also a problem like anger issues, irritability, things like that?
Yeah, but my wife was pretty understanding. She handled that pretty well. I would flail at night because in these nightmares, you're reliving this, you're flailing about. So she ended up sleeping in a different bed for a while.
Or at times, he and I have been together for 45 years. So we've had this experience for a long time, but he was able to talk with me about not the details, but we came up with a plan. And when he would have the nightmares, I knew what to do because it would wake me up. And he was I never felt like I was in danger. It wasn't that type of nightmare, but he would call out, he would yell out. And so I knew what would help him. And I said the same thing to him every time it happened and I woke up. It was like I was giving him an order to wake up. And that seemed to help him tremendously, or sometimes he needed to get up. And so I would say, Doug, wake up, get up. And that's what he would do. And that would help to
cut down on the flailing.
Cut down on the reaction that he was having, right, and allow him to kind of calm down is what I want to say. So that's primarily what was going on at the time we came to see you. And during the day, sometimes this wasn't as evident to me, but it became more evident after we came to see you. During the day, sometimes, particularly if he was out in the backyard by himself, there were times he doesn't know what the trigger is, but he would have a flashback and almost not be totally present.
Right.
And that was because of when you're out in front of the front lines, you're out there all by yourself. So you're pretty alert. So I developed this fear of being out in the open, exposed, which is what I was. So when I work in my backyard, sometimes I would feel like I was too exposed and I had to literally dive for cover to get out someplace where I have a refuge.
I think you mentioned to me too that you had difficulty sometime when you went through walking through long hallways because you thought it reminded you of the bunker system that you were in, and I think, do you remember telling me that?
Walking long hallways would bother you.
Yes, well, that's
like being in a bunker.
Well, that's just like the trenches, because what would happen? These Chinese would come in at night, and they'd go in a trench, and then they would call what we called a closet. They would dig out on the side of the trench, 180-degree arc into the soil, so they could step back in there, and they weren't standing in a trench, but they were standing in like just a little enclave, if you will. And so when you would walk down the trench, they would step out and shoot you. And they would they would build those things at nighttime in our trenches. So when we came out in the morning from our bunkers, and you walk down the trench, all of a sudden this guy steps out of this cutout and levels down on it with his rifle. That makes you pretty leery of being in the hallways.
Yeah. So when I first saw you, I think after I heard your story and of all the things you were going through, I think I put you on Effexor when I started you on. Tell me about what that did to you. By the second time I saw you, tell me about your experience with that and how it helped.
The Effexor.
Yeah, well, I guess it didn't do anything for what I'm describing. It did modify my behavior. My wife would probably tell you better than that what effect it had on me, because I don't self-monitor that way.
Right.
Well,
that's typical with men, by the way. Usually the women in our lives see more in us than we men see in ourselves. That's very common. So what do you so what do you think observing him when he started taking that?
Well, I think what happened with the Effexor was a gradual. It calmed him down, but it was a gradual decrease of the nightmares. It took some time, of course, and then of course he and I would talk about it, and we still had our plan in place. So I witnessed that there was a great decrease in the number and instances of the nightmares. And then after that was going along nicely, I know he mentioned to you that he's still getting flashbacks. So it was the flashbacks that was continuing to be a difficulty for him during the day and at night. So it was at that time that you recommended the mini press. I don't know what the
mini press, or it's called Prazosin, and it's actually a blood pressure medication. It's a very mild medication, but it's
right.
We use that sometimes for nightmares and flashbacks, and it doesn't always. It doesn't. A lot of these things, they don't take everything away completely, but it just reduces them, and where they're not quite as bad.
Right. So, and for the Effexor and the mini press, you had him on the lowest dose, which seemed to be very effective. It was not good. He started to have balance problems when you increase the Effexor. So we went back to the lowest dose, and the mini press really seemed to help him with the being calm at night, sleeping much better. And I know it was about a month ago, I think, that we you took away the mini press. That it seems like it's okay, because we had gone a couple of weeks without it, and it seemed to be okay without him taking the mini press. So right now he's only on the Effexor at night, and he's sleeping much more calmly and restfully, and seems to be getting better sleep.
Good.
As I am.
Well, I mean, I think you had told me that he seemed to be more back to his old self again.
Right, right.
I mean, we can't erase all the trauma that you've gone through. We can't erase all the guilt. Like I said, even though I contend that the guilt you're feeling is not at all your fault. You're gonna think differently, but that's from my perspective. When you're in charge of people, you have to make tough decisions, and you made the right decisions those both times. And the fact that two people died was really not your fault. You had no idea that would happen, and how would you have felt if you would have made a different decision and then four people died instead of one? And
that's a rational argument, but
true, it is.
in these instances, we don't think rationally.
You're right.
I mean, it's been 75 years. If I thought rationally, I would have forgotten it by now, but that doesn't work.
You're right. Absolutely right. Another thing that I know we talked about, which helps, I think your daughter is a social worker, but is we call EMDR therapy.
Right. Yeah, she's an LCSW.
What's that?
She's an LCSW and is a trained EMDR therapist.
Right.
But I don't share that with her.
Right. But you didn't want her to do it, but doing that can be very helpful for trauma.
Yeah.
So if you're open to that, that might be something. Another thing I hear a lot is that, you don't want to, it's very difficult to read any depictions of war, any books, seeing any films about depicting any war scenes is very difficult. And 4th of July can be very difficult for veterans, with the loud banging and noises. And that sometimes, I had one veteran told me that he bought a pair of like earmuffs or he on 4th of July he wears these all night so that it rounds out the sound of outside the stuff that might be going on.
Yeah.
One thing that we've noticed over the last several years, he from the war he developed a hearing loss that is common type of hearing loss from being in the war, from the artillery. But as he's gotten older now, the hearing loss has gotten much worse due to the aging process. So he now, thank goodness, has hearing aids. And I've noticed sometimes when he's not wearing his hearing aids, and if he's in the backyard, that makes him all the more feeling isolated. So, as we tell people, you have to pay attention to what's going on in the aging process with the senses. And so the hearing, even if he's out in the backyard working, he puts his hearing aids in so he can hear what's going on around him. It's just really important.
So anything else you'd like to share, either of you, about what's going on in your lives or anything else that you would like to share?
No, but uh, I'm running out of time.
For 95, you look really good, Mike. We talked about the fact you have a much younger wife there.
Yeah, that's the secret. I played that smart.
I already told you my dad's 88 and he was in the Korean War, but I think more towards the end of it, and he didn't see any action. He was a mechanic of the trucks and things that they use and Jeeps and whatever, so he did the mechanical stuff. And so but it was I've talked to many veterans already and over the years, and it's difficult to hear it from me too, even though I didn't ever experience it. But some of the things I've heard is some of the horrific things are, it's just so difficult. I mean, some of my patients I've talked to them to, they've really brought me to tears. And I interviewed another guy, and I got really emotional when he was talking, because it's just, I feel it, and I feel your pain, and it's not, as a doctor, I want to alleviate all your pain, and I know I can't. I know I can only do so much, and medications only help so much, but at least the medication that you're on is going to help your quality of life, so.
Yeah, I'm grateful for the fact that he accepted the medication, which surprised me to no end. And it's just been really very, very helpful for him. And the other thing is we were able to communicate with each other. I mean, it's taken a lot of years for me to talk with him about what was not what was going on in the war, what was going on between the two of us and what was going on at night, for me to have a full understanding. And then what really helped was for the two of us to come up with a plan. And we've got an agreed upon plan. I know what I need to do. He knows how he's going to respond to what I say to him. And that's been really effective. And, we've talked about being so concerned for those individuals who do not have a partner that can help them through this. So, whatever can be created for them is so important, and important to him, because he cares about all the vets, let me tell you.
One thing that I felt was helpful to talk to other vets the same age, but they're few and far between now.
Right.
So you don't get to talk to other vets because you share the same experience. So you realize that, you're not the only one that went through this, and you hear stories that are worse than your own. That helps somewhat. But at 95, most of my friends are deceased.
But he does we have some friends who are in the military and have had their own difficulties in Bosnia, Iraq, Afghanistan, and, with the burn pits and that sort of thing, and coming under fire. So it seems to help him to talk with them, with the younger guys, about this and share his experience. So that's one thing that he does that I find to be very, very helpful to him.
And to them, I hope.
And to them, I hope. Yes, I'm sure. To them.
Right. It's kind of like a mentoring,
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Is there like an organization or regular meetings you go to, or?
No, we just have acquaintances.
We just have to have several friends in the military service.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I also talked to a lot of guys from the Vietnam War, so they're mostly in their 70s, and that's, well, those are people that, the war right after you, the one you were in, so those are also the people, more of them are alive, so those are other people you could maybe, connect with too.
Yeah.
The more
Yeah.
you have more in common, but war is war. I mean, and that's why they say war is hell. It's a horrible situation, and I think a lot of veterans are upset with Iraq and Afghanistan and all that, the way it turned out. The fact that they were there so many years and nothing good came of it, and it
Yeah.
just feels
Yeah.
like they wasted their
Yeah.
time and effort, and then this disastrous pullout from Afghanistan. It was just, it was horrible. And then they, there's been a lot of suicides. It's horrible. Some of
Yeah.
us.
Yeah. Yeah. Terrible.
Yeah. Well, the one in Korea was that was that first move of the communist states to expand after the war, and we stopped them there, so we felt pretty good about that. It never was a war, it was a United Nations action.
Right.
But we felt we did our job there, so that was comforting to those of us who came back home.
Well, I really appreciate you both to come on. I really appreciate you sharing your story, and I thank you so much for your service to our country. I really appreciate it, and we all do. And so I hope you have a great rest of the day. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Corona, for everything you've done.
Yeah.
I hope you enjoyed the show today. If you have issues with mental health, or if you know someone who needs help, I'm available. If you want to contact my office, my website is drpaulcoronamd.com. That's DR for doctor. And you can also learn more about me on my website. My phone number, if you want to contact my office directly, is 949-481-0118. If you want to learn more about my methods and what I do, my latest book, I recommend The Corona Protocol, a scientifically proven medical solution to stop addiction, bullying, homelessness, school shootings, and suicide, 30 years in the making. In this book, I tell 30 original short stories about people. And I also have my first 3 books, Healing the Mind and Body, the trilogy, available online. I look forward to you joining me again on the next episode of The Dr. Paul Show.